Excellent. Well, I will try to keep this interesting and brief for whoever is staying, because I know it's almost lunchtime. So yeah, my name is Peter Lund. I'm the COO of a company called SuperGenius. We are in Oregon City, the very end of the Oregon Trail, for anybody who grew up with an Apple II. And we started our life... So anyhow, very quickly, the folks who look at gaming market sizes think that VR is going to be big soon. They have sliced open the proverbial chicken and looked at the entrails, and they think it's going to be worth a lot of money. Who knows whether this is correct or not, but we do know that we're entering a new part of human-computer interaction and that it's going to be interesting. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that even though the vast majority over the next couple of years of this industry is likely going to focus on games and entertainment, there's a very large part of the industry that is going to be things other than what we all do right now. And so if you think about these sea changes in technology that we've experienced in our lifetimes, when we went, for example, from HTML to mobile, there were a lot of web teams out there that could fill the gap and start making mobile applications. The only people that can make 3D software are us in the room, real-time developers, and there are not that many of us. So that leaves us in very interesting and strategic places as people who make these sorts of things, and we need to start thinking about where we want to fit in the market. So SuperGenius is our company. We started as an external development company way back in 2008. We mainly did art, and we expanded our capabilities into the full development stack over time. And it's been interesting, but our DNA is certainly in AAA video gaming. That's what we do. We make good real-time, VR, and AR. Here's some of the stuff that we've done with some of the larger HMD manufacturers. And we like to keep at the very front end of where the technology is going, working on interesting products to keep our really interesting craftspeople happy. And as we were getting into virtual reality in particular, we became really interested in the way VR talks to our brains, because it talks to our brains in a way that is completely different from any media that humans have yet created. When we move into VR, our brain actually registers it as a memory of a place that we visited. When you watch a film, you have a memory of watching a film. When you see a play, you have a memory of seeing that play. But when you go into VR, you have visited a place, and it registers in your mind as a place that you visited. And we know how powerful this is from all of those goofy little YouTube videos that we watch of people attempting to climb up a rock wall in VR and losing their hold and falling flat on their face. It's because their brain talked to their body and believed that they were falling down. And so we became very interested in how powerful this is. What can we do with this connection between our media and our technology and our minds? And how far can we push this? And so we became very interested in the world of healthcare and therapeutics. And as we started to dig around, we realized that the folks who were doing best were different than we were. Here are two examples of the types of therapeutic real-time that exists in the world right now. This is a game that is created for specific types of neurological and memory-related conditions. It is the first piece of software that is currently being assessed by FDA as a prescribable substance, which is absolutely fascinating. Over here, we have a pain therapy. It's used for burn victims, and if you are ever unfortunate enough to suffer severe burns, wound care is absolutely excruciating. It can last for 45 minutes to hours if you're severely burned. This comes from a company that decided that maybe VR would be useful for distraction-based pain therapies. And so they created this little environment where you can shoot these balls at little teddy bears. With stuff like this, they were able to decrease the amount of narcotic pain intervention necessary by 20 to 30%, which is huge. And so looking at what was out there in the market, and looking at the stuff that we do, we noticed a pretty significant difference. And the reason is the folks who are going into these fields are medical technologists. They don't know real time. It is not their world. They know the potential value of it, and they're trying to assemble these teams, and they're trying to make things. But we felt that we could do a little bit better, that perhaps there was a model. Come on now. There we go. that would better use all of the skill sets that already exist out there in the world. And our idea was that the best therapies and the best ways to help people with our technology are to bring together the AAA developers with the medical experts and the biomechanical engineers. This had been done, but no one had thought to talk to the AAA folks. And maybe they're doing it over at Oculus or HTC, but it's not public yet. And so we started to look around for people who were doing things that interested us, and happily got to work on some interesting stuff because of this guy right here, Dr. Albert Chi. I know you guys are doing the best you can. Thank you. So Albert Chi is a trauma surgeon at OHSU. That's the Level 1 Trauma Center in Portland, where we are. And Dr. Chi does lots of trauma surgery, but he came from Johns Hopkins University, where he specializes and specialized in a new type of surgery called targeted muscle reinnervation. Now, when I first got in touch with Dr. Chi, it's because he was 3D printing pediatric prosthetic limbs. If you think about kids, they go through prosthetic limbs the same way they go through shoes, and prosthetics traditionally are extremely expensive. And so Dr. Chi was 3D printing these functional prosthetics, and I emailed him and said, hey, we've got amazing 3D modelers. In their downtime, we'd love to make these prostheses better. Just make them, somebody can have a steampunk princess arm or an Iron Man arm. Let's keep the functionality there, but let us do the art and design. And we sat down and chatted for a bit, and he said, this is fascinating, and I love your idea, but I can do one better. We need to talk about this, the modular prosthetic limb. The modular prosthetic limb is the most advanced prosthetic in the world right now. The US military spent something like $170 million on this thing. It has fully articulated fingers. You can attach it to an upper limb at any point of amputation, so you can just have the hand, you can have it above the wrist, elbow, all the way up to the shoulder. Oh, it's Troy. Hello, Troy. The modular prosthetic limb is an amazing piece of technology, and it functions directly from brain output. So the thing that Dr. Chi does is to rewire the human body to allow it to talk to the modular prosthetic limb. And when we move to the... Should I just tell you when we're moving to the next slide? Is that... Maybe I'm hitting the laser. Is there just a delay? Yeah, I've been hitting. Anyway, whatever. I'll keep hitting the green top button. It'll be fun. Anyhow, Dr. Chi does this thing called targeted muscle reinnervation. He takes the nerves that used to serve the lower portion of the limb that no longer exists and redirects it into muscle groups that are also not needed for the lower limb. And what happens is that the lower limb remaps onto the upper limb where TMR has been completed. And so for people who have had this surgery, if you poke them in their upper limb where TMR has been done, they're actually feeling you poke them in their palm or in their index finger. Their whole limb has remapped to their arm, and it also allows them to control these prosthetics. There we go. This is Johnny Matheny. He lost his arm to cancer several years ago. He was the first person, or one of the first people, to get TMR in the United States, and he's the first person in the US to have osseointegration, which means he has a piece of metal that runs straight into his humerus. This is a much better way of attaching a prosthetic than just having a harness, because even if you have that prosthetic tightly attached to your stump, it's still going to move around. This allows him to manipulate the arm naturally. He has the natural weight and feel of the arm in his hand. It's removable, so he can change the batteries, and he can do all sorts of interesting things with it. For example, he can leave the arm over there and still flip you off from the corner with his arm. It's really quite fascinating. We use myoelectric bands to capture signals coming out of his muscles and interpret it, turn it into kinetic movement. The MPL has all sorts of different movements and functionalities, including distinct finger movements. He can hang loose, he can turn the thing around, he can turn his entire hand around, because again, when your arm is a robot, you're not limited by the meat that we all have. It's quite interesting. And Johnny is learning to play the piano, which is just mad. By the way, we do live in the future. It's right now. We're inventing early stage Luke Skywalker arms. It's a hell of a time to be alive, friends. The arm functions off of just basic linear regression analysis. You have to train yourself to use one of these things, and it can take a long time to learn how to control one of these. I've attempted to do it. It is not easy. It's not particularly intuitive. And traditionally, what you do if you're being fitted with one of these arms is to go into the clinic, see a representation of the arm on a flat screen, and then attempt to make it move in the way you want it to move. So you'll be sitting there, you've got your myo bands, you don't have an actual arm, you see a robotic looking thing on a screen, and it's like, okay, I want you to flex your elbow up and flex it down. So we're asking people to, A, remember what it was like to control a limb that either they've never had or haven't had for a while. B, recreate this kinetic movement in a different way than they're used to. And then C, attempt to map themselves in this movement onto a 2D screen. So when Dr. Chi and I started talking, we started talking about what we could do with virtual reality. And we decided to make a virtual reality prosthetic trainer. And that's what we've been working on for the last couple of years. So there's Dr. Chi and Johnny. Justin, as it happens, was working on a cowboy from Overwatch when Johnny came into the office, and the cowboy in Overwatch has a robotic left arm. Johnny's originally from West Virginia, and so as Johnny would say, well, you didn't get a cowboy, but you did get a hillbilly with a robotic arm. Johnny has a distinct sense of humor. So I think we do have a video of Johnny using, there it is. So we recreated the modular prosthetic limb in VR. Johnny uses this limb exactly the way he uses his actual prosthetic out in the world. He's controlling it with his minds and thoughts. And this is pretty darn good considering the fact that he's not having any sort of haptic feedback here to manipulate these devices. The benefit for Johnny is that when he is wearing a prosthetic like this one, his mind body actually re-inhabits the limb, so he feels like it is his. This limb here, the MPL, does have sensors in the fingertips and on the palm that will allow Johnny to directly feel things, and he's going to have a surgery later this year that should allow him to feel some basics like texture, pressure, and perhaps hot, cold. So we're going from motor tracking using the brain to direct sensory feedback into the human brain, which is going to be absolutely, absolutely fascinating. So, a couple of takeaways here, and a couple of places where we're going to go next. These types of conversations have allowed us to think differently about the work that we do. We're still a video game studio. We're always going to be a video game studio because that's where you hone your skill set and you hone your craft. But as a craftsperson in this industry, you might find a time where you're a little bit tired with, making games for a buck here and there. Or maybe you want to do that thing and do something else. And so we're now at the stage where we've been talking to the Applied Physics Lab at Hopkins, Dr. Chi. We're thinking about how we can use these devices for specific and targeted therapies. We're going through patent cycles right now, and we're really, really excited about what the next couple of years are going to hold. It's not going to keep us from focusing on games because we have to have that focus in order to be the best at doing stuff like this. You guys can do it too. So, good real-time development, it's valuable and it's rare, as we said. And it's only going to become more rare in the next couple of years. Keep doing that thing. Most industries are not familiar with what we do yet. And most of us in our industry are not talking to those industries. Conversations need to happen. There are people on your team right now who are interested in all sorts of things. They might be interested in Legos or botany or history or whatever the case may be. I guarantee you there is a use case in there somewhere. Find some experts in that thing. We don't know jack about trauma surgery or really robotics. We know a lot more about it now. It's been a lot of fun. Find somebody that can augment what you're interested in and go talk to them and see what you can do together. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I think that was actually awesome. There's a particular doctor that works in the UK who was doing something very similar with one of the apps you talked about before, and I believe it's been a while since I talked to him, but I understand that the test that they did by having that kind of distraction therapy in an ice world was even more effective.
Yes.
And there has been arguments it's more effective than upping the dose.
Yes.
Which is, I think, utterly astounding, particularly with the burn victim side of things. And the fact that we have that physiological response by being put into a virtual world of cold is, to me, magical, literally magical.
It really is. And the thing that's really interesting about the way we're doing pain therapy right now is that it's distraction-based, and the use cases are pretty obvious. You know, you've been burned. So you should be in a world that is full of ice and penguins and throwing little snowballs at them, right? What is the mechanism that causes the pain to diminish? We don't know yet. Neuroscience has to research this. Are there specific targeted things that we can do? We know that mirror therapy works for people who've had amputations. It doesn't work quite as well if they're experiencing telescoping, which is when the phantom limb is just sucked into the stump and it feels like your whole arm has been compressed into the end of the stump. And you can't do that in mirror therapy the same way. We can do that in VR. We can show you your hand right here at the end, and you can pull it back out. And so these are the types of targeted therapies that we're interested in exploring. And then I think science needs to come back and figure out what the specific mechanisms are, so that instead of just kind of the shotgun approach of, yeah, let's put you in a cold world and see what happens, maybe we can do something even better so that we can bring those numbers up.
Well, totally, and this particular doctor also does a lot of remote work, so he's using AR and VR to help with remote surgery. So there's these practical kind of realities. There's also these things that we're talking about with games, and I think also one example I loved was to deal with the anxiety that kids were having over injections, particularly vaccinations, and a particular game, I think it was Spanish team, I can't remember, did this amazing experience where effectively it's a bee walking around and then they tell you they're going to sting you. And that's when you do the injection. And again, it just like massively changes the outcomes and the willingness to get that injection, which I wish my son had had access to when he was that age.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm rambling on. So people, please let me, have other questions. So
yeah, we've got plenty of time for questions and few people, so we can be conversational. Yes.
Hi, Peter. So nice to meet you.
Likewise.
One question I have for VR is that so many people have thought of it as inaccessible because it's so expensive, and now you guys have this next level amazing thing that's happening. Like, is that in your radar right now of how to make it more accessible for like everybody? Or,
no. And here's why. There are two reasons. Which isn't to say that we're not thinking about that thing, because we're thinking about it all the time. The cost of good VR is coming down really drastically, so we know that Oculus is going to release the Quest pretty soon. It's going to be tetherless, standalone, room scale. This is great. And they're probably going to release it at a price point around what you'd expect to pay for a console. So the cost is going down. The systems that we're using here, of course, are old school Rifts. You're going to need that $2,000 laptop. You're going to need the Rift. And then, of course, we have to hack shit as well. Anyway. The reason why we don't worry about it in this world is that we are in the world of health care, which has completely different pricing models. And so if we think about a digital pharmaceutical, if you think about the actual cost and the potential cost of taking a painkiller long term versus spending $500 for a device you can send home with a patient, and then they can check back into the company, and then $100 a month for a licensing fee, or even $500 a month for a licensing fee. In the United States, I know everybody isn't from the US, but our healthcare system is terribly exploitative, and so here you can get away with all sorts of stupid things, and hopefully that doesn't last too much longer, but that's the way it is now. So there are ways for us to get around it. I think it is still a concern when it comes to take-home therapies that a lot of people are doing right now, meditation, physical therapy, things like this. We're focusing on targeted clinical therapies, testing them out in healthcare environments, and then possibly getting them out into the world. And I think by the time we have something that's ready to ship and is approved by FDA, the cost for the devices will be low enough.
As a Brit, I strongly recommend the NHS.
Yeah. Maybe we can just license your products.
Sadly, too many of our folks want your system. I don't exactly know why.
That's a shame.
But I also think 2020 is an interesting year. Obviously, there's a nice synergy with Vision and 2020 Vision. So I suspect there'll be a lot of branding, people wanting to get new types of device out. Obviously, we've got the Quest. We know the PS5 is coming out. It's going to have a strong VR focus to it. I suspect end of the year we'll see something from Apple. I don't know, but that's my belief. So I think we are getting to a stage where if the pundits are talking about 2023 as just a tipping point for visual computing, which is a lot of people seem to be saying, my suspicion is that we need to start seeing some of those consumer-level devices coming out.
Yeah, I think so. I've been saying for a couple of years that we're in the Pocket PC, Palm Pilot stage of what mobile devices are now.
Exactly.
That's where we are in VR AR.
I'm that old too.
Yeah.
So, any other questions? So, I mean, I'll add one because I think this is really critical. So I've been talking to people in the MOD recently. So it's a different thing to the Ministry of Defence in the UK. What I think is really interesting there is their quite advanced use of what they call simulator training.
Yes.
And I think it's not just about military, it's also about kind of any blue light services. The level of ability to put people into situations and train is incredibly powerful, but the systems they tend to use are incredibly outdated. They're using the same game engine that was used for Operation Flashpoint back in 30 years ago. And that's what they've bought for the whole of NATO.
Oh, bless.
And no bless. And yet, so you imagine me sitting in a room with, a bunch of these military types looking like I do, scaring the hell out of them. But the reason I'm saying all this is because I think there's a wider question, and healthcare is a very key area, and that's particularly because there's a lot of positive moral and kind of human values that comes out of working in healthcare. But do you think we're not open enough about how we integrate as an industry in games with other walks of life? Is there a general problem there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. There are reasons why we're not in these areas, and it's because we don't like them. And because we look down on folks who sell out and go and work in these parts of the industry. We all know this. The thing is, when you take that stance, and you can make an ethical argument for it. There's a moral reason why you're not there. You're not at the table, and you're not bringing your ethics to the conversation. And so that is the thing that is so important, and why we need to go out there and have these conversations and sit at the table. Because we know, A, the best way to implement these systems. B, we're gamers and storytellers. We think about ethics and stories and the way people talk to each other and all of these moral problems all the time. And because we tend to be knowledgeable about these things, we've built this universal system of ethics that is not perfect, but it's also better than the status quo in many of these industries. So I would encourage people to set aside their unwillingness to go and have these conversations. Bring your preconceived notions, but be honest about them, and go and talk to people who are very, very different than you. I think that's one of the things that one of the mistakes that has been made in the last couple of years is saying, this is so wrong, or this is so distasteful that I'm just not going to talk about it or talk to these people. that has to stop. You have to go have the conversations so that you can change the way things are. Otherwise, you can't.
And I kind of add to that a little bit further, which is, I think, unless we have those conversations, we can't have our own ethical arguments in our games as effectively.
You've abrogated your responsibility to be an ethical actor.
Exactly.
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, what I found really interesting about talking to these MOD folks is, again, partly influenced by working with Tony on Reality Clash, having the idea of thinking about, actually, this is how that particular group thinks and operates. If I'm going to be able to make a realistic game dealing with that conversation, there's actually a whole bunch of really interesting stuff that they have to do. So artillery people have to go through a whole series of checks and balances and ethical decisions and operational criteria, and they have to actually think about the impact of the collateral damage. But we don't ever deal with collateral damage in traditional, shooters and combat games. All we do is try and get the biggest possible explosions.
Yes.
We never add the actual moral implications that real military people have to think about.
So the underlying point is that if you talk to people who know different things than you and think differently than you might learn something.
Heaven forbid.